This Detroit News Podcast is brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, which is now called The Engine Room, brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. And as always, I'm your host, Pistons writer Coty M. Davis at the Detroit News. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, that's Coty, COTYDAVIS _24. And of course, I'm here with my co-host, Tarohn. Tarohn, what's going on, man?
What's going on, Coty? And make sure you guys follow me on all social media platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHN FINLEY. And as always, Coty, I'm ready to talk Pistons.
Yes, sir. And look, man, we are less than a month away from the start of the NBA playoffs, man. And I think that I don't only want to just speak for myself, but I think when you watch the Pistons, when you watch the Boston Celtics, when you watch the Oklahoma City Thunders, when you watch, let's say, the top 12 teams in the league, I think everyone is ready to get to the playoffs. And as of right now, the Detroit Pistons still hold the number one seed in the Eastern Conference with a 49-19 record. At the time of this recording, we are recording this before they take on the Washington Wizards on Thursday, the first half of a back-to-back set, followed by the Golden State Warriors on Friday. If the Detroit Pistons take care of business in both of those games, especially against the Washington Wizards on Thursday, you're looking at them eclipsing 50 wins for the first time since the 2007-2008 campaign. I think that's a remarkable accomplishment for the Pistons. However, on today's show, we're going to change it up a little bit because even though they are less than a month away from the start of the playoffs, they have been hit by the injury bug pretty hard over these last couple of days. Tarohn, as you remember, last time you and I was on the show, we talked about Asar Thompson. He had just went down with ankle injury. He came back. And literally the day that he comes back in the loss against the Toronto Raptors, the Pistons announced that they will be without Isaiah Stewart due to a left calf strain. And then 48 hours after that, Cade Cunningham, much respect to him, decides to dive for a loose ball in the first quarter of their victory against the Washington Wizards on Tuesday, got kneed in the back. Now he's out with a left back contusion. At the time of this recording, there's still no timetable for Cade Cunningham or Isaiah Stewart's return. Stewart will be reevaluated sometime next week. Cade Cunningham, I'm expecting him to come back sometime next week as well, especially considering that I think he has played 61 games this season. And he needs, about 4 more games so he can qualify for those postseason awards. But, Ron, let's just start off right there. What are your concerns about the Pistons trying to make sure that they finish the regular season strong? And next week, they have a pretty tough schedule. I think it's a 3-game homestand. They play against the Atlanta Hawks, who's on a 10-game winning streak. The Los Angeles Lakers, who at the time of this recording, before taking on the Houston Rockets, they have won 6 games in a row. They have some pretty hard games coming up next week, but knowing that they're still in the running for number one to finish the season with the top overall record in the Eastern Conference, Tarohn, what are your concerns about these injuries?
Yeah, so I think this is the toughest balancing act that the Pistons will have to pull off, just, like you said, with the injury bug and just with the tough schedule and only being up at the time yesterday, I think only 3.5 games above the Celtics. So the Pistons, want to hold on to that number one seed, but they also want to go into the playoffs with fully healthy or as healthy as possible. So it's just, to me, like going to be a balancing act. And I think, to be honest, that you would have liked to see this a little earlier in the season. Now, I know we did at stretches where, the team wasn't healthy. So Dennis Jenkins was, getting more of a run, or, guys like Isaiah or Jalen Duren has been pretty healthy throughout the season, just what he's been able to do, which we're going to talk about, more in the second half. But just this late in the season, you really want the rotations to kind of form. And I know JB Bickerstaff has been getting a lot of questions about who he's been playing, some of the bench players like a Kevin Huerter, Javonte Green, or who he's closing out with is the Sar in the lineup. So you just want your lineup as healthy as possible and your rotation as close to playoffs, who you're going to play in the playoffs as possible this late in the season. So to me, it's just a little disappointing, or not disappointing is the wrong word for it, but the fact that we can't see, what has been the best team in the Eastern Conference fully healthy down the closing stretch. That would disappoint me if I was a Pistons fan just heading into the playoff stretch if they can't, kick this injury bug like you mentioned.
And I get your concern, and it is a little bit concerning because as of right now, the Pistons, they do have a 4.5 game over the Boston Celtics for the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. And I do believe that they're going to finish the season with the top overall seed. But, you want your guys to get into a rhythm going into the playoffs. And when I look at the fact that they're going to play, let's say these next couple of games without Cade, Cunningham, and Isaiah Stewart, I'm worried only because, like I mentioned, next week you're going to play two of the hottest teams in the league on your home floor in the Los Angeles Lakers and Atlanta Hawks. And depending on how long Stu is going to be out, you're looking at a situation where you're going to have to go to the West Coast and play against the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder, maybe a final preview. And it's one of them situations where, look, once again, I'm not too concerned about them finishing with the top overall seed in the Eastern Conference because I still think that's doable. However, I want to see Cade Cunningham be in a position where he's healthy and in a really good rhythm going into the playoffs. And it's the same thing for Isaiah Stewart as well. Look, we know that the Pistons can stay afloat without Isaiah Stewart. However, it is 100% important to make sure that not only is he in a good rhythm going into the playoffs, but you also looking at the fact that you got to make sure with this calf injury, we know how tricky these calf injuries can be. I mean, calf injuries can either go one or two ways. Either that means you're about to have an Achilles tear, knock on wood, hopefully that don't happen, or this can be an ongoing issue like the issue that we have seen up there with the Milwaukee Bucks and how many times Giannis Antetokounmpo has had these lingering calf issues, and it's part of the reason why the Bucks and his crazy situation has not been solved throughout this entire season. So with that, you just got to be really, really careful with Stu, and you definitely don't want to see the Pistons going to the playoffs with Stu either being at 50% or not ready to play at all. Then you're looking at Paul Reed now you're looking at a situation where you're asking Paul Reed to fill in that vacancy. Yes, I have a lot of faith in Paul Reed, and I believe Paul Reed is probably one of the best, reserve big men in the league. However, in order for this team to get to the second round, the third round, and possibly the finals and win the whole thing, look, that's another topic for another day. But in order for the Pistons to go after their main goal of winning the championship, especially considering that I think the Eastern Conference has been very competitive, but I think there's only 4 teams that literally has a true legitimate chance to get out the Eastern Conference: the Pistons, New York, Cleveland, and Boston. The fact that you're saying Detroit in that situation, you can rank them however you want to, but the fact that the Pistons do have a chance to get out the Eastern Conference and compete for that Larry O'Brien trophy, that's the reason why you want to make sure that this team is 100% healthy going into the playoffs. Injuries are a bad and terrible thing. However, on the flip side, I think that it came at a perfect time because it has given JB Bickerstaff an opportunity, a true opportunity to see what you have in other guys. Last week, Tarohn, you and I came on this podcast talking about what was the purpose of trading for Kevin Huerter. Like,
right.
I was under the impression like maybe you should have kept Jaden Ivey and dealt with the financial situation in the offseason, because at one point it seemed like Jaden Ivey was a better fit for this team than Kevin Huerter. However, since I made that statement, you were sitting there right next to me in that game against the Philadelphia 76ers to the point where you was like, I think Kevin Huerter is starting to find his groove with this team. The fact that you had to call upon his number during the time where you was playing without Ausar Thompson, Kevin Huerter has found a rhythm with this team, and it's not just Kevin Huerter. It's also Marcus Sasser. We saw how big he was in that victory against the Brooklyn Nets. And not only that, Dana Jenkins had an opportunity to finally break out of his slump.
Right. And I agree with those things, and I really like that you mentioned that because those were two guys I really wanted to highlight, in the good side of this, even though there's never really a good side of injury, but like you said, it can create opportunities for a guy like Marcus Sasser, who was, kind of buried on the bench after coming back from injury early in the season, just because of how well Dennis has played. So it's giving him a second chance at some point. And then Kevin Huerter, like you said, a trade acquisition at the deadline, never really got the right minutes. And someone to me that I've never seen Kevin Huerter play like he's playing now, because he's always been kind of this knockdown shooter. And you wonder, like, okay, when his shot isn't falling like it is right now, I think it's below like 30% or low 30s. But what does he do? And he's trying to get rebounds. He's trying to play defense. He's trying to pass. He's driving to the rim. We've seen him do
and it's actually pretty good as well. Like, I've heard Bickerstaff say that Kevin Huerter is an all-around player.
Right.
And when I heard that, I'm sitting in the press conference like this with my phone, like, really? Like, we know what all he could do is shoot. But I've been thoroughly impressed by the way, he hustle on the defensive end, by his playmaking. If he's not getting an assist, he's making a hockey assist. I mean, Tarohn, to your point, he has been really good at all of the other intangibles that's kind of has made him a good fit with the Pistons this year.
Yeah, and I just like how aggressive he was. I think he led the game in shots. I'm trying to think if it was the 76. I think it was the 76ers. It was the first game, not Memphis. But just how aggressive he's been when given opportunities, and still trying to do other stuff, like we said, when his shot isn't falling. So, yeah, this is going to be a really telling test. Dennis Jenkins really can use this opportunity just with his struggles, and I know he broke out of that yesterday, but he has played really well against the Wizards. So I want to see what he does in other games, and if he can continue this. And I also want to see what Karis LeVert has done, just because, he hit some shots yesterday, but he's been struggling a little bit. So these are all guys I want to look for. But, as an overall NBA fan, like, the injuries do, they just aren't the best, just because of, like you said, the tough schedule. And just think about the matchups like Cade can go against next week if he was fully healthy. And he might still go against, guys like Luka Doncic on Monday, or, Jalen Johnson, who's been all NBA caliber. And, even Anthony Edwards, I know he just went down the other day. But these are the type of tests that you will want heading into the playoffs. And also for Cade, if you want to get back in that MVP conversation, I think he's kind of tailed off a little bit, just because.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Right, just because of how he's looked in, I don't want to say bigger games, because he puts up so much of a workload, but just what guys like Shea and Jokic and Wemby have done, I think they have just been a little bit better, but not to diminish, because I think Cade has probably as big as a role as those guys. I would say he does have a big of a role as those guys. So I just think these are all things that I'm going to be watching for, like, later in the season.
I don't want to divert too much from the conversation, but I do, like, we keep it 100. Cade's MVP candidacy has fallen off. But my thing is, I hate why it has fallen off. Because if it was up to me, the top 3 MVP candidates in no particular order would be Cade, Jaylen Brown, and Victor Wembanyama. But right now, the favorite is SGA, a guy who missed, about 15 games or something like that. And in those 15 games, the Thunder still had a really, really, really good record. I don't get it. I wish it would go to one of those 3 guys, because the definition of most valuable player is the definition of Cade, Wembanyama, and Jaylen Brown. But that's neither here or there. But yeah, I agree. But Tarohn, before moving on, I do want to ask you this. Since the injury bug started hampering the Pistons, and you're looking at a situation where we have seen a lot of Kevin Huerter, we have seen a lot of Marcus Sasser, Dennis Jenkins, he has finally broken out of his slump. He started in place of Cade Cunningham in the second half against the Washington Wizards, and ended up scoring 15 points, dishing out 6 assists, 2 steals, and the block. Out of all 3 of these guys, knowing that the playoffs are less than a month away, Out of these three guys, who do you think is going to benefit the most and actually get a rotational spot in the playoffs? Because JB can sit here and talk about, I got 13, 14, 15, 16 guys to play with and all this other stuff. But we know come the playoffs, and this has been a track record that he has gone all the way back to Houston, he is definitely going to shorten that rotation. Out of all three of these guys, who would you like to see the most have a playoff rotational spot?
I would say, and this is kind of like a change of direction from what I had going into the season, because I wouldn't say I was the most high on Marcus Sasser, but I would say Marcus Sasser just because of how well he's been playing, how well he's been shooting. I think he knocked down like 4 threes in both, I want to say, the Grizzlies game and the Nets game. But just how well he's been playing, whether that was starting when Asar was out and off the bench the last game. And I do agree right now it's best to have Dennis get those minutes just because he's the second leader assist person on the team. But I would say Sasser just because of his shooting. And I like those guards that just play full court defense and stuff like that. So that's what I would say.
That's interesting, man. I honestly don't know who I will pick as of right now. Maybe it's something we could revisit maybe next week, especially once this team become healthy. But I like the fact how you mentioned Marcus Sasser, because the one thing I believe that the Pistons are missing is the fact that they need a combo guard who can go out there and not only just play defense. And I think that's something that majority everyone on this team could do outside of Duncan Robinson. But Duncan has played better defense, in his career since joining the Pistons when you compare it to his time with the Miami Heat. However, I don't know who I'm gonna pick. I don't know if there is one particular person that I could pick. Once again, I like the fact that you mentioned Sasser. However, I do like the overall production that we are seeing from Kevin Huerter. And it's one of those productions to where if you look on the stat sheet, you might think to yourself, Kevin Huerter is just wasting minutes, but he's not. Like when he go out there, he's bringing the hustle, the intensity, the effort, everything that the Pistons like to say they are. That's what he has embodied over these last couple of weeks. So shout out to Kevin Huerter, man. We'll definitely see where this can go. But on the other side of the break, Tarohn, you think that one player on the Pistons roster has been better than Mr. Cade Cunningham? We're going to dive into that. All of that and more on the Engine Room. Don't go nowhere.
For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service. So you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of the Engine Room, of Detroit Pistons podcast, brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. Tarohn, we all know that Cade Cunningham is literally at the forefront and has been at the forefront of the Pistons' success ever since he got drafted, especially the last 2 years. We have watched this young man take the leap into MVP status. In the last segment, I did say I think it's unfortunate because he should definitely be top 3 MVP consideration alongside Jaylen Brown and Victor Wembanyama. But with everything aside, when you think of the Detroit Pistons, of course, the first player you think of is Cade Cunningham. However, since the All-Star break, you said that somebody is better than Cade or has been better than Cade. Who is that and why?
I think we have to give it to Jalen Duren. And this is no disrespect to Cade. I think Cade is still the best overall player, like you said, on the Pistons and, in the MVP conversation. To me, in, top 10, top 5-ish is debatable conversation. That's what Cade Cunningham is to me in the entire NBA. But I think this is more of a credit to Jalen Duren. He just had his career high yesterday against the Wizards, who granted did let.
Don't you do it. Don't you say it. Because of that guy right there, I don't acknowledge that. Okay, so let's leave that right there.
Right, we'll leave it. Coty,
I don't acknowledge that.
But back to Jalen Duren, he has been playing at a phenomenal level since coming back from All-Star break, since that suspension. And to me, you can make the case that Duren has had the bigger leap just being in that most improved conversation, but just on how he's expanded his game. To be honest, when Duren first came out of Memphis, and I've been watching Jalen Duren since he was in high school, just it was unfair, like just
He was
how
a man
big
child
he
in
was.
high school.
Exactly. So just the way he's developed his game from being like, to me, like a lob threat, person that can get blocks and different things like that. But to have like Cade can give the ball to Duren and he can take it up the court. I know, shout out Greg Kessler. He mentioned that how much he's worked on his left hand. He wouldn't have been able to do something like that on the broadcast yesterday, but he wouldn't have been able to do something like that in prior years. I just think that he is the definition of most improved player. And to me, I think he should be in that all NBA conversation. The only two big men that I think have been playing better than him are two guys in the MVP conversation, and that's Jokic and Wemby. But other than that, you can make the case that Duren has been the third best big in the NBA, in my opinion.
I like that you said all NBA. And it's funny because remember at the start of the season, I told everybody that Jalen Duren was going to be an all-star. People laughed at me. And look what happened. He ended up being an all-star. I told Jalen Duren about that too. He said, my God, he bumps me with them big hands. He got big hands. Every time I fist bump him, it hurt. Him and Isaiah Stewart. I love those guys. I hate fist bumping them because it hurt. I don't think they realize how strong they are. But that's neither here or there. But to your point, Tarohn, Jalen Duren has been awesome, man. In the 14 games that he has played since the All-Star break, you're looking at a situation where this man has recorded career highs across the board in the 14 games. As a matter of fact, this entire season has been nothing but career highs. 23.5 points, 11.5 rebounds, 1.5 blocks to showcase his defensive growth, which is something that I've been more impressed about ever since I came him to Detroit, because I'm like you, I've been watching and looking at Jalen Duren ever since he was in high school. Don't really count his high school stuff too much because, like I just mentioned, he was a man child back then. His one season in Memphis, it was pretty solid, but I did not see this when I look back at his time in Memphis, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But I like the fact how you mentioned that Duren can actually be an all NBA selection, and I want to see. I agree, because outside of, like, if you take Jokic, of course, and Wembanyama out of this equation, can you name a big man that actually has played better than Jalen Duren this season alone? Not just the last 14 games, but this season alone. I mean, I'm just thinking about big men. The only other big man that I could, think of that's been more productive than Jalen Duren, if you count him as a big man, which you kind of have to, is Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he's definitely not going to reach the 65 game mark. Plus, this season has been such a mess in Milwaukee to the point it's like, okay, nothing is good is going to come about in that situation. And I mean, I just don't know. Like Anthony Davis, he's another guy that's not going to reach the 65 game mark. He probably haven't played 20 games this year. Right. I mean, other like realistic names that's going to play over 65 games are Bam. He hasn't been better than Jalen this year. Alperen Sengun in Houston, my guy, he hasn't been better than Jalen this year. Rudy Gobert, he's definitely hasn't been better than Jalen this year. So, I know the All NBA selection and the voting committee, they do not go by positions anymore. So maybe that might trip him up just a little bit. And, I saw on First Take a couple of days ago, there was debating whether or not Luka has done enough to become first team All NBA. And I'm like, well, when you look at guards alone, I think Cade and SGA got that on lock. And then when you look at, the second team guards, well, then you got to start taking into consideration guys like Jalen Brunson and stuff. So that guard position is extremely deep. However, man, the leaps that Jalen has taken this year, man, it has been awesome. And what I've liked more about watching Jalen's progression, more so than coming out of All-Star break, I know a lot of people, and I think you and I have done it on this podcast as well, talked about the absence of a true number 2 scorer. Jalen has that. He is this team's second best scorer on the team, plain and simple. And the only knock against him is the fact that, I guess you could say he can't really create his own shot like a Cade or somebody who can play similar to Cade, like most people think of when they think of number 2 scoring option. But Jalen, man, once he gets the ball down low about 8 to 15 feet where he's shooting like 45 to 50% or whatever the case might be, man, he has just been phenomenal this season.
Yeah, I agree. And I think yesterday just showed it, because I was starting to wonder, because before they announced he had a career high, I was like, is this Duren's career high? But I think
he has gotten closer to that career high. I think he set the career high when he was in Mexico City against Dallas in November. And since that, he has been close to scoring 33, 34, 35, 36 points on several occasions.
Right. And I think yesterday was like the perfect opportunity, just because like Cade went down early in the first quarter. And I think at one point, if I'm not mistaken, going into halftime, Durham had 15 points. And the second leader scoring on the team, I can't remember exactly who it was, but they only had 6 points. So that just shows that if Durham wasn't out there, that might be another loss like the Pistons had against the Nets. And granted, they were without, Stewart. Cade went down early. And then you have just Asar trying to get back into rhythm. Not to make excuses, because they are the Washington Wizards. They were, when I was watching the game, I had forgot some of the players like that on the Wizards were still in the league, like a Sharif Cooper, like a Jaden Hardy, who's a Detroit native. But it was just, that's still an NBA team at the end of the day. So just because what Bam did and what Duren did yesterday, that doesn't take away from the fact that Duren hit his career high against them, and also what he's been doing, like I said, since coming back from All-Star break and since suspension.
Really quick before we close out, since we're talking about Jalen Duren, I think that he is only starting to scratch the surface of how good he can be. Where would you like to see his game develop and grow the most? Whether it's before the start of the playoffs, or when you take a look at his season as a whole, as of right now, that you would like to see more from him going into next season for him to truly take that step as being, I think as of right now, Jalen Duren has solidified himself as a top 10 big man in the league. I think when you take into consideration all the big men that we have, he is without a shadow of a doubt top 10. But in order to get to top 5 and top 3, what would you think he needs his biggest growth?
I think the biggest thing I want to see his growth in, because to me, I've been measuring Jalen Duren against 2 other bigs, and that is against Evan Mobley and against Chet Holmgren. They're all different body types, but
different play styles. That's interesting.
Yeah. And then different play styles as well. And then they're also both taller than Duren, but Duren's a lot more bigger, just weight-wise and physical and different things like that. But the thing that those guys have that he doesn't have, their handling is a little better, but also they are better shooters. So I want to see Duren at least get a mid-range shot, and he has been hitting that pretty effectively this year. But to be honest, a three-point shot, how much would Jalen Duren, how much would that hurt defenses just thinking about, oh, is Jalen Duren going to roll to the rim? Or is he going to pick out and pop from 3, kind of like a, Chris Bosh? He's a different type of big than, because he started off as more of a forward than Duren. But just thinking about that kind of big, because if you have Duren shooting threes, he's really unstoppable. So that's probably, to me, the biggest room for growth. If he can develop that, even knock down like in the mid-30s, low 30s, I think he's definitely got to be talked about as a top 3 big in this league if he can consistently just knock down a shot.
That's interesting. And with that being said, that's going to conclude another installment of the Injury Room, a Detroit Pistons podcast brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. As always, I'm your host, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News, Coty M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, it's Coty, COTYDAVIS _24.
And make sure you guys follow me on all social media platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHNFINLEY. Once again, TAROHNFINLEY.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.